Thank you for joining us for our January webinar. I am Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager of the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch. Let me get our PowerPoint pulled up. And I appreciate everybody joining on a Monday instead of our Thursday. So really glad that you could be flexible with us. All right, as always, if you have any questions during the presentation, if you're joining us on Teams, you can just put those in the chat, or at the end, if you want to raise your hand and come off mute, that works too. You can also email those to me at erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And again, as always, we're recording our webinar and it will be posted either later today or maybe tomorrow to our Documents and Resources webpage. The recording of last month's webinar is available on our Documents and Resources webpage. And in addition to all of our announcements and reminders, we had two main focuses: preparing for final fiscal year 2025 allocations. So we looked at why your amount may change, and then pages within GMAP that will definitely require revision or may require revision depending on that change. And it is not on the slide, but I will go ahead and announce that those final allocations were just uploaded into GMAP like within the last 5 minutes. So those are in there now. And then the other focus was using those final allocation amounts and the tentative census poverty percentages and hold harmless percentages to start planning for school year 25-26. All right, today we've got all of our usual announcements and reminders, and then we are going to focus on some common Title I Part A misconceptions. All right, reminders. Be sure that you check the status of any open consolidated application in GMAP, just making sure that any issues have been addressed on that consolidated checklist. We want to make sure that the status is KDE Consolidated Consultant approved. Registration is still open for the 2025 National ESEA Conference, and that is taking place February 19th through the 21st in Austin, Texas this year. So you can register to participate in person in Austin or virtually. And I also have a link here for the recently updated foster care non-regulatory guidance that USAID just updated within the last few weeks. Taking a look at our obligation of this year's funds, if we're spreading it out evenly over the first 15 months of the grant, by the end of January, we should be at about 40% obligated. So if you are significantly below that at this point, be sure that you are checking in with your finance officer, making sure that you're going to be on track to have at least 85% obligated by September 30th. And these are all of our open projects. We've got 3 open projects right now. No due dates right around the corner. Looks like the next one is June 30th, but I'm sure that'll just be here before we know it. Right, in this month's Title I newsletter, we had an article on time and effort, specifically semi-annual certifications. What we call just a pulse check, kind of checking in with everybody, reminding you about making sure those private school and homeless funds are being spent in a timely fashion. A link again to those updated foster care guidance. Information on the Commissioner's Weekly Message, which is just a way for you to stay informed on all sorts of things happening at KDE, not just Title I related. Our Principal's Perspective article was about using your survey responses for parent and family engagement. And then we had our usual recurring articles. Right, your year at a glance suggested tasks for January. So this is a new addition to our webinars, and this is based on feedback that you all provided in our feedback survey. And our entire year at a glance resource is available in our Title I handbook. So this isn't an all-inclusive list, and the timeline could vary a little bit based on the individual systems and timelines in your district, but this just gives you a general idea of some of the things that you should be thinking about this month, in addition to all of those ongoing tasks that you handle every month. So up first, utilize that hold harmless notification to start planning for the upcoming school year. I just sent that out to you all last Thursday, so let me know if you didn't get it. It's also posted on our Documents and Resources webpage. And again, I did cover how to read it, kind of what the information means in our December webinar, so you can check that out as well. Establish a plan and timeline to work with the other federal programs in your district to coordinate the consolidated application for next year. So when we coordinate, it just helps ensure that all of the funds are being used as effectively as possible to address identified needs. So you want to be sure that you're discussing who's responsible for each part of the application to make sure that you are completing it in a timely fashion. So be sure you think of maybe any new staff who haven't worked with federal programs before, haven't worked in GMAP on the application, things like that. And think about what types of supports that they might need prior to the school year 25-26 application opening. And then finally, contact private school officials to kind of establish a consultation calendar for the upcoming application and school year. So once a private school indicates that they would like to participate in Title I, the district has to meet with the officials of that school to discuss needs, develop a program plan for participating students. Remember that consultation is not a one-time thing, it's ongoing. And that allows the district to monitor progress at the private school, just like you do for your public schools. So scheduling regular meetings throughout the school year during that initial consultation meeting just helps make sure that they're already on the calendar, helps keep you meeting on a consistent basis. All right. Our main topic for today, as I mentioned, is Title I Part A misconceptions. So as part of the continuous improvement process here in our division, the Title I team looks for patterns in applications, in requests for technical assistance, monitoring findings, all of that. I regularly ask all of our Title I consultants if anybody has been seeing the same issue across multiple applications or monitoring evidence, or maybe they're getting the same question multiple times from different districts. And this just allows me to see the areas in which our districts or our schools may need some additional support or guidance. And all of that informs our newsletter articles, our webinar topics, the standalone resources that we create. So at this point, every district's fiscal year 25 application has been reviewed at least once. And we've also finished reviewing all the evidence for our desk monitoring districts. There were 11 of those, and we are in the midst of our consolidated evidence review. So kind of taking all of that into consideration, we've identified 4 areas where there were some common points where additional clarification may be needed. So some of these misconceptions could actually lead to future compliance issues, and we definitely don't want that. So we're going to be talking about per pupil amounts, rank and serve violations, school level budgets, parent and family engagement, and just some general spending issues. Right, up first, we've got our per pupil amounts. So on the left-hand side, I've got what we know. We know that Title I is intended to be a school-based program, meaning that the majority of funds should be going to the schools. Now, the amount that goes to each school is going to depend on that per pupil amount, or PPA. And the selections for method of qualification and method of allocation of funds, you make those in GMAP on the school program description page. Those selections determine which schools are eligible for Title I services, as well as the rank and serve order that is going to be followed to distribute funds to the schools. We also know that schools at or above 75% poverty are served first. And then for our schools below 75% poverty, we can rank them a couple of different ways. We could use district-wide poverty percentage, meaning we just go highest to lowest straight down the line. Or we could use grade span rank, where schools in the same grade span are grouped together, and then they're served down the poverty line within each group. And as a reminder, some of our districts, specifically those with fewer than 100 students or just one school or one school per grade span, they are exempt from rank and serve requirements. So our two misconceptions, Okay, our two misconceptions related to PPAs go hand in hand. The first one is districts must use the same PPA at all participating schools or at all schools within the same grade span. And the second is districts are required to use the average PPA calculated by GMAP. So although districts can assign the same PPA to all participating schools, it's not required. GMAP does provide you with an average PPA. It's just a reference. You're not required to use it. And the important thing for our districts required to follow rank and serve requirements is that you are assigning PPAs based on those requirements. You aren't serving a lower poverty school with a larger PPA than that of a higher poverty school. So you take the needs of each school into consideration and you assign PPAs intentionally while also following rank and serve requirements. Now, if you do use the same PPA or very similar PPAs at all your schools, you need to be extra vigilant in monitoring the expenditure of funds to avoid overspending at individual schools, because this could create rank and serve violations. And I have an example of this on the next slide. All right, so on the left-hand side, this is a district that's using district-wide rank. So you can see that the schools are ranked in poverty order, highest to lowest. We're going to look at the center column here, that PPA is based on district-wide rank. So we can see that we've got two schools above 75%. They are being served with PPAs higher than all of the other schools, as they should be. And then once we get past that 75%, we see that all of the other PPAs have just been assigned in descending amounts, correlating with the school's poverty percentage. And you can see that there's a pretty wide variety in those PPA amounts. We've got anywhere from $814 to $1,500. As long as they're in rank order, and the selected PPA provides the school with an allocation that is sufficient to run a Title I program, they can be different. They can look like that. Now, if we look at the final column here, this is where I've added some examples of rank and serve violations using district-wide rank. So the first is going to be at Smith Elementary. We see that they have a PPA of $1,451.05 compared to Truman Middle School, which has a PPA of $1,451. So Truman Middle School has a higher poverty percentage than Smith Elementary. Even though that is just a few cents difference, that's still a rank and serve violation. The PPA at Smith must be less than or equal to the PPA at Truman, because Truman has the higher poverty percentage. And the same goes a little further down with Howard Middle School. Howard Middle School can't have a PPA that's higher than Adams Elementary because Adams has the higher poverty percentage. Now on the right side, we've got kind of the same district, but using grade span rank. So we're looking at the PPAs based on grade span rank. Again, we see that our two 75% schools are being served with the larger PPAs in that middle column. And then for the schools below 75%, we've got two groups. We've got elementary schools with Smith, Adams, and Lincoln. And for that group, the PPAs have been assigned in descending order based on poverty percentage. And then we have the next group, middle school, which is actually just one school. It is less than all of those other elementary schools. This is fine because we're using grade span rank, and the district has selected to put the elementary grade span first, then the middle school grade span. Now, looking at that last column, we can see where we've got some rank and serve violation examples. So when we look at the PPAs for Adams and Lincoln, we see that they are higher than the PPA at Smith. Smith has the highest poverty percentage, so we can't have those higher than Smith. Within that grade span, rank order is not being followed. We can also see that the PPA for Adams is higher than the PPA at Truman Middle School. Now, even though the district is using grade span and they're serving elementaries and then middles, remember, Truman is above 75%, so they have to be served before we get into that grade span distribution. Right. Our next area of misconception relates to school level budgets. So we know that each school's total allocation is based on their per pupil amount. We also know that that allocation amount needs to match the amount budgeted in enterprise ERP or EERP, Munis, whatever we're calling it these days. So that's how you ensure that spending occurs in line with the approved application and that your rank and serve order is maintained. We also know that some districts are required to reserve parent and family engagement funds. If their allocation is $500,000 or greater, they have to reserve at least 1% of parent and family of those funds for parent and family engagement. We also know that 90% of that 1% must be distributed to the schools. So let's look at our misconceptions related to school level budgets. So the first one is that each school must buy the same things or the same types of things or use the same object codes. Now, we don't typically see this when budgeting for staffing. We have one school may use Title I funds for 2 teachers and another may use it for 3 paraeducators, etc. Where we tend to see this is for things like registration fees, travel, general supplies, all of those types of items. So for example, we might see a budget where every school gets $500 for registration fees and $1,000 for general supplies, something like that. And sometimes when we review the corresponding Munis EERP budgets, we see that funds aren't being spent from these codes at every school. So remember that purchases made with Title I funds should be based on needs. So when you call or email your consultant and you ask if something is allowable, they'll probably ask you, is it addressing an identified need? What's in the needs assessment? What's in the CSIP? Each school has its own unique set of needs. So maybe $500 for registration fees is absolutely perfect for one school. But maybe another school needs more or less. Or maybe you have a school that doesn't want to use any of its funds for registration fees at all. All of those options are fine. You should be working with the schools to determine the most effective use of funds to address their unique needs. And another misconception that we see is that parent and family engagement funds need to be divided evenly across all the schools. This is a fairly common practice. For example, let's say we have a district with $10,000 for parent and family engagement spread across 5 schools. So they just go in and everybody gets $2,000. Now that is the easiest way to split up the funds. But when you think about the populations of each school, that's when maybe it doesn't make as much sense. So what if one of those schools has 500 students and another one has 125 students? Even if those schools are conducting absolutely identical parent and family engagement events, it's probably going to cost more at that larger school. The grade range of the school may also impact how funds are used. At an elementary parent and family engagement event, we tend to see a lot more like creating, actually needing supplies for things than at those middle and high schools. So that might take a little bit more money to buy the supplies for that. So when we monitor districts where funds have been divided evenly for parent and family engagement across all the schools, it's not uncommon to see one school that has overspent while another has underspent. So one thing that you could do is determine a per pupil amount for the distribution of parent and family engagement funds. You might find that that is more effective and more equitable. And we do have a number of districts that are already doing this. If you are consistently budgeting funds for things that a school doesn't need, you could be impacting your ability to obligate funds in a timely fashion. So when it comes time to calculate the percentage of funds being carried over to the next fiscal year, all of those object codes that have just been sitting there untouched are going to start to add up, and all of that counts towards your carryover. Right. Another area with misconceptions is parent and family engagement. And we've included information on parent and family engagement in lots of our webinars and newsletters. And I know I've mentioned multiple times that this is an area where findings are very common for districts and schools. Some of our more recent topics have included a focus on engagement versus involvement, as well as two-way communication with parents as opposed to one-way communication. We have also sent some applications back this year with reminders that parent and family engagement funds should not be used for things like meals, awards, door prizes, agenda books and planners, things of that nature. So we've got two misconceptions on this slide. So the first one is that any event that parents attend can be counted as a Title I parent and family engagement event. Just because parents are invited to an event that is happening at a Title I school, that doesn't automatically make it an event that meets the intent and purpose of parent and family engagement. So if we think back to what we know about parent and family engagement, these events need to be, of course, engaging and help build capacity. Building parents' capacity supports the idea of shared responsibilities for higher academic achievement, which is a phrase that we see referenced throughout ESSA. Parents and schools are partners working together for student success. So during a previous webinar, we suggested using a question like, what will parents learn or gain at this event that will help them improve their child's academic achievement as a gauge for determining whether or not an event meets the purpose and intent of Title I and whether or not funds can be used to support that event. So when schools are developing their needs assessments and their CSIPs, they're identifying student needs and they're determining the tools and strategies and activities that the teachers need to support those needs. But don't forget to include parents when you are working on those plans. What could the school share with parents that could be implemented at home to provide further support? Also remember that this can go beyond kind of the standard math and reading nights. For example, social emotional learning, mental health issues, things like anxiety, they can impact achievement. So if that's an identified issue for a school, what about an event where families learn mindfulness activities that could be easily implemented at home in addition to being implemented at school? Or what about events focused on technology, internet safety, all of that kind of stuff? These can be parent and family engagement events. Events that do not build parent capacity are often going to be social in nature. So things like award ceremonies, chorus concerts, holiday parties, those are all very fun, but they don't meet the intent of the parent and family engagement program. And when we see references to these events in GMAP, or maybe we see it when we're reviewing the EERP budget for monitoring, we'll probably reach out and ask for more details about what actually happened at that event, what was purchased, things like that. Our other misconception is that Title I funds can be used to print items like student handbooks and all of that kind of beginning of the year paperwork. Providing an item or a document to parents does not mean that it's automatically a parent and family engagement document. So paying to print a copy of the school handbook for each family at the beginning of the year is not engaging them in their child's education. Additionally, just giving documents is not two-way communication, and that's where the focus is supposed to be for parent and family engagement. Right, our last area of misconceptions is just general spending. So here's what we know. We know that districts have to spend in line with the approved application. We know that GMAP and EERP or MUNIS must be updated periodically to reflect actual spending. And we know that KDE recommends checking for that alignment at least quarterly. Spending in line with the approved application, that is a requirement in and of itself. But doing so helps district meet a number of other requirements. So as we discussed earlier, it also allows you to verify that rank and serve order has been maintained. It helps you track the percentage of carryover to ensure that you request a waiver if necessary. So let's look at our misconceptions. The first one is that overspending is okay, as long as it's from an object code that was in the approved application. So we know that when you create your GMAT budget, many, if not all of the amounts that you initially put in there are estimates. So a school may know that they're going to need to buy supplies or pay registration fees, whatever, but they don't know the exact cost of every single item that they're going to need to buy or everything that they're going to register for. That's why the application can be revised. So when your consultant goes in and reviews and approves your application, one of the things that they're checking for is that the amounts budgeted are reasonable. That is one of the requirements for spending federal funds. They have to be reasonable. They also make sure that the items are necessary to implement the Title I program and that all of the expenditures meet the intent of the grant. So even if the items that you are purchasing are allowable, if you're spending thousands or even tens of thousands more than what was approved, it's possible that the amount is no longer reasonable. That's when you need to check with your consultant and go in and make revisions before you're just overspending from those object codes. The other misconception is that all that matters is that the entire project is not overspent. Remember, Title I is about more than just the bottom line. We have to keep that rank and serve order in mind. It's not like our personal finances where as long as we don't spend more than we have, the bank doesn't really care how we spend it. Title I is different. When you're overspending individual object codes and not paying attention to that, that can lead to overspending at schools, which can create rank and serve violations. So that's why it's important for district staff working with finances, whether it's a finance officer or a bookkeeper, they need to be familiar with some of these programmatic rules and requirements. And I heard the chat, so let me see if we have a question there. So all right, I like this message from Mary. I feel like our parent and family engagement is stale. Sometime it would be great to hear from a school or district that has fresh ideas. I know the goal is parent understanding to improve student achievement, but there's lots of ways to get there. My creative brain has apparently gone into hibernation. I understand. And that is, I think, a very common sentiment that we hear. What do we do? How can we get parents to come to these events? So it's one thing that we always look for when we're out monitoring, trying to identify best practices, or when we're looking at applications and we see kind of a fresh new idea. I think we could definitely look into if you are doing something or one of your schools is doing something really innovative and effective, and you would like to maybe share that, whether you join us for a webinar or we write something up for our newsletter, we can definitely look into that. So if there's something that you're doing and you want to reach out to me and see if we can share that with others, that would be great. All right, so let's kind of look at what a rank and serve violation would look like once you start spending the funds. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the school allocations in GMAP. So we see all of the schools have been assigned the same PPA, $500, which is absolutely fine. We see everybody's total allocation there, and that's just from the PPA multiplied by the number of low-income students. Let's see. So if you add all these up, the total amount that's available to allocate to the schools is $972,500. So the district should take these totals from the GMAT budget or from the PPA page, mirror those in the GMAT budget, and then take that GMAT budget and mirror it again in the actual EERP budget. And side note, don't forget that when you make a change in one of those platforms, you do need to make the same change in the other platform. So if the district is selected for monitoring by KDE, the consultant is going to look at the totals. We're going to look at the actual object codes that have been used in each one to make sure that they match. We're also going to make sure that spending is in line with the approved application. So this is what can happen when we start to see a lot of overspending, even in small amounts. It does all start to add up. So we see we've got the actual spending in the first column for our schools, and then the number of low-income students. And I used that and just kind of worked backwards and developed what I'm calling the actual PPA based on spending. So let's look at School C. We can see that School C used a $500 PPA, exactly what they were supposed to use in GMAP. That's great. But we can see that schools B and D have overspent their total allocations. And as a result, that means that schools A and E have spent less than what they were allocated in GMAP. So when we work backwards and we figure out those actual PPAs, now we see the rank and serve violations. School A is the highest poverty percentage school, but schools B, C, and D have all actually been served with larger PPAs once all of the spending's said and done. So even though the total amount spent still adds up to $972,500, we still have compliance issues here because the schools were not served in rank order. Right, so that wraps up our Title I Part A misconceptions for you all today. So if we have any questions, we can answer those. And we do have another comment. Okay, so Lacey agrees with the parent and family engagement ideas. Maybe we can have a different Title I meeting, just ideas for parent and family engagement. We do the same thing every year. I think a lot of people do that, and it might work for a few years and then all of a sudden it stops working. One thing I would definitely recommend would be making sure that the schools are getting input from parents on the types of events that they want to have, because that can change from year to year. All right, let me check email and see if there are any questions over there. All right, don't see any in the email. And of course, you can send those to me or your consultant later. So our future webinars, looks like we're meeting on the 27th several times in a row. So we'll be back to Thursdays in February 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Of course, we've always got our link to the monthly webinar feedback survey on here. And we do check that regularly to make sure that we're providing you information that is useful. I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar that adding that year at a glance information that came straight from you all. So we'll do one last check for questions. I do not see any, so thank you all for joining us, and we will see you in February. And if you joined us after the beginning, you'll be getting an email from me, but final allocations are now available in GMAP for those of you with an approved original application. So happy to be able to announce that for you.